It's strange how a man's entire reputation can fall apart in 60 seconds. For me, that minute came at 7:02 on a quiet Thursday morning. The air was still, my sprinklers were humming softly, and I was doing something I'd done every morning since retirement, watering the flowers my wife loved. Then I heard the sirens. At first, I thought they were passing by. Willowbrook Estates was supposed to be peaceful, the kind of place where retirees spent their mornings reading the paper, not running from the law. But the sirens grew louder, closer, and when two patrol cars turned the corner and stopped right in front of my house, I froze. A young officer stepped out, hand already on his holster. "Sir, step away from the hose." I blinked. "Excuse me," he repeated, louder this time. "Step away from the hose and put your hands where I can see them." I remember laughing, not out of arrogance, but confusion. "Officer, I'm just watering my roses." The second officer, a woman, looked uncomfortable. She glanced toward the sidewalk, and that's when I saw her, Cordelia Ashworth, the HOA president, standing there, arms crossed, lips twisted into the kind of smile only power-hungry people wear. She spoke before the officer could. "He's been violating community water restrictions for weeks. I warned him. This morning, he was at it again, stealing community water after hours." I lower the hose. "After hours? It's 7 o'clock in the morning." Cordelia smirked. "The cutoff is at 7. You're 2 minutes over. You know the rules." The male officer turned to me. "Sir, she's filed a trespassing and property misuse report. We have to act." I stared at him in disbelief. "Trespassing? On my own land?" Cordelia folded her arms tighter. "Technically, the HOA owns the easement. You're standing on common property." I looked at the badge on the officer's chest, then back at her. "You have no idea who you're talking to." She tilted her head. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm talking to, another rule breaker." That was the moment I realized it wasn't about water or flowers or any of the nonsense written in that 60-page HOA rulebook. It was about power. The kind people like Cordelia crave, the kind they wield like a weapon. The officer approached carefully. "Sir, I'm going to have to place you under arrest." I didn't resist. I just handed him the hose, smiled, and said quietly, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." He cuffed me right there, in front of my neighbors. I saw blinds part, curtains shift, faces peek out. Everyone watching. No one speaking. That's the thing about fear. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And by the time it reaches your door, it's already inside your home. As they drove me to the station, I watched Cordelia through the car window. She was smiling. The kind of smile that says, "I won." They booked me for trespassing and water theft. Water theft, for using the same hose I'd owned for 20 years. The officer taking my fingerprints looked embarrassed. "Sir, is this some kind of misunderstanding?" I smiled faintly. "Son, that's what we're about to find out." 2 hours later, Officer Martinez walked into the holding room. I'd known him back from my years on the bench. He looked at me and shook his head. "Judge Sterling, what the hell happened?" I leaned back. "Apparently, I stole water from my own lawn." He frowned. "Cordelia again?" "Cordelia again," I said. He sighed. "You'd think a retired federal judge would be left alone." "Power doesn't care who you are," I replied. "It only cares that you obey." Martinez leaned in closer. "I'll check the report. Maybe I can get you out quietly." I nodded. "Don't rush. Let her think she's won. Sometimes, the best way to catch a liar is to let them speak first." He gave me that look, the one he used to give me in court when he knew I was setting up a trap. "You're planning something." "Not yet," I said, "but I will." That night, when I got home, my wife, Ellen, was waiting on the porch. She looked worried. "Bart, are you all right?" I kissed her forehead. "I'm fine." "She called the police on you for watering flowers?" "She called the police because she needs to feel powerful," I said, "and because she doesn't know who I am." Ellen frowned. "She knows you're retired. She's seen you in the neighborhood." "Retired, yes, but not who I was." I looked down the street at Cordelia's house. 3 doors away, American flag on her porch, security cameras facing every direction. "Tomorrow," I said, "we're going to show her what real rules look like." 6 months earlier, when Ellen and I first moved to Willowbrook Estates, it seemed perfect. Gated community, quiet streets, friendly faces. After 30 years in federal courtrooms, I wanted peace. We met Cordelia at the welcome meeting. She introduced herself as Madam President of the Willowbrook HOA. She spoke like a politician, charming, confident, rehearsed. But there was something off in her tone. She didn't say community like it meant people. She said it like it meant control. At first, it was small things. A letter about my mailbox paint being slightly off tone. A fine for leaving trash bins on the curb 5 minutes past pickup. Then another for Ellen's garden gnomes, which apparently violated aesthetic uniformity. We laughed it off. Everyone said the same thing. Don't fight her. She always wins. But then I saw the neighbors. Mrs. Penelope, an 82-year-old widow, fined $500 for having a small Christmas wreath that didn't match the HOA's approved color scheme. The Henderson family, fined because their kids drew chalk art on the driveway. Cordelia had turned a friendly neighborhood into her personal kingdom. One night, Ellen said, "You can't stay silent, Bart. You spent your life upholding justice. You can't let this woman bully everyone." I sighed. "I'm retired, Ellen. My days of fighting are done." She smiled. "Maybe justice doesn't retire." The next morning, I noticed something strange. Cordelia was outside, taking pictures of our house, measuring our fence with a tape measure, jotting notes on a clipboard. I walked over. "Morning, Cordelia." She didn't look up. "Your fence is half an inch higher than regulation." "I'll lower it," I said calmly. She smirked. "You'll also get a $250 fine." "For half an inch?" "Rules are rules," she said and walked away. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. It was about control. And Cordelia Ashworth was addicted to it. 2 weeks later came the water incident. The HOA had implemented water restrictions due to a minor drought. Everyone complied. But Cordelia decided to enforce it like martial law. 7 a.m. sharp meant 7 a.m. sharp. That morning, my sprinklers ran until 7:02. I didn't notice, but she did. She called the police at 7:03. And so, I became the first man in Willowbrook history to be arrested for watering roses. But what Cordelia didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that she had just started a war with the one man who could legally destroy her. That night, I sat in my study, looking at my old credentials. The plaques, the gavels, the commendations, relics of a lifetime spent defending the law. Ellen walked in quietly. "You're thinking of going back to court, aren't you?" I smiled. Not as a judge this time. As what then? As the man she shouldn't have crossed. I poured a glass of whiskey, leaned back, and stared at the window where the sprinklers still glistened under the porch light. "Tomorrow," I said, "we begin." The next day, I filed my first complaint, not as a homeowner, but as a legal observer. The HOA had issued me citations without due process, a violation of their own charter. I requested access to the HOA's official documentation. Cordelia refused, citing confidentiality. That was her first mistake. When she denied a member access to financial and operational records, she broke the law, a law she clearly never bothered to read. But I didn't push yet. I waited, because sometimes the best way to destroy corruption isn't by striking fast, but by letting arrogance dig its own grave. Cordelia kept tightening her grip on everyone. She fined Mrs. Penelope again, this time for unauthorized bird feeders. She sent violation notices to the Hendersons for their kids' bicycles being visible from the road. When Ellen planted tomatoes, Cordelia said it violated ornamental guidelines. The neighborhood was suffocating. People whispered instead of waving. No one wanted to cross her. No one except me. And that's how it began. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with a single truth. The law doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to those brave enough to use it. Cordelia thought she'd humiliated me that morning when she called the police. But what she didn't realize was that by accusing a retired federal judge of trespassing on his own property, she'd given me exactly what I needed. A case. People think a homeowners association is there to protect a neighborhood, keep things clean, maintain order, preserve value. That's what I believed too when Ellen and I moved into Willowbrook Estates. But I learned that power, when unchecked, always finds a way to rot. Cordelia Ashworth wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was controlling it. After my arrest, the air in Willowbrook changed. Neighbors stopped waving. Lawns that were once full of laughter went quiet. It was as if fear had moved in permanently. Every week, a new rule appeared. An email from Cordelia's office with subject lines like "New Compliance Reminder" or "Mandatory Beautification Policy." The policies sounded harmless until you read the fine print. No unapproved plants, no backyard gatherings, no visible toys, no holiday decorations beyond 36 inches in height. It wasn't about beauty. It was about obedience. 2 mornings later, I saw Mrs. Penelope standing outside her house, holding a letter and shaking hands. She was an 82-year-old widow who spent her days tending flowers and feeding birds. I walked over. "Morning, Penelope. Everything all right?" Her eyes welled up. "She find me again, Judge. $500. For the bird feeder. The one hanging from your porch?" She nodded. She said it's attracting unwanted species. I looked at the feeder, a small, wooden thing with a few sparrows fluttering nearby. "Unwanted species," I said quietly, "like peace and joy." She laughed weakly, then her smile faded. "I don't know what to do. I live on a pension." I put a hand on her shoulder. "You'll do nothing for now. Just keep your letters. We'll need them later." That afternoon, I saw Cordelia walking her dog, or rather, marching it like a soldier. I stepped out to greet her. "Cordelia, we need to talk." She turned, still wearing that confident, unblinking smile. "About your fines? You're behind on payment." "I'm not here about me," I said. "I'm here about everyone else. The fines, the threats. This isn't how a community should be run." She tilted her head. "Community thrives on discipline, Mr. Sterling." "Discipline or domination?" I asked. She smiled. "Some people need a little push to follow the rules. And others just enjoy the pushing," I said. She leaned closer. "You think being a retired judge makes you untouchable? This isn't your courtroom anymore." "No," I said quietly, "but I still know how justice works." She laughed softly and walked away. And that laugh, that sharp, cold sound, told me she thought she'd already won. A week later, the Hendersons called me. Mark Henderson sounded nervous on the phone. "Judge, I don't know what to do. She's threatening to call Child Protective Services." "CPS? For what?" "For our kids' toys being left in the yard. She said it's child neglect, that it makes the neighborhood look bad." I met Mark and his wife, Laura, that evening. Their little boy was sitting on the steps, holding a chalk stick. The driveway was covered in bright drawings, suns, stars, crooked smiles. Cordelia had called them defacement of property. I crouched down beside the boy. "Did you draw these?" He nodded proudly. "It's our house." "It's beautiful," I said, and meant it. Laura looked exhausted. "She sends us letters every week. We're scared she'll do something worse." I said softly, "She already has. But not for long." That night, I sat at my desk surrounded by piles of HOA documents, copies I'd requested and been denied. But what Cordelia didn't know was that some of her board members were starting to question her, too. One of them, a quiet accountant named Raymond Clark, slipped a manila folder under my door. Inside were financial statements, bank transfers, and something that made my blood run cold. The HOA's corporate registration had expired 18 months ago, which meant, legally, Willowbrook Estates HOA didn't even exist. Cordelia wasn't a president anymore. She was an impersonator. Every fine, every letter, every lien, all of it fraudulent. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "You really don't know who you're dealing with." The next morning, I walked down the street with a small digital camera strapped to my belt, the kind that time-stamped every frame. I started recording everything. Cordelia inspecting homes, taking pictures, calling contractors. I noticed how she'd pause at each mailbox, as if checking who might dare speak against her. At 6:59 a.m., my sprinklers clicked on. At 7:02, Cordelia appeared, like clockwork, camera in hand. She snapped pictures, looked at her watch, and made a call. That was when I realized her watch was 3 minutes fast. When she left, I checked the footage. The timestamps proved everything. The sprinklers shut off at exactly 7 o'clock, but her video claimed 7:03. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was manufacturing violations. That afternoon, I stopped by Officer Martinez's office. He was reviewing the footage I'd sent earlier. He shook his head slowly. She filed a false report. That's a criminal offense. I smiled. And now we have proof. He looked at me. You're building a case, aren't you? Yes, I said. And she's writing it for me. Over the next few weeks, Cordelia escalated. She fined the Hendersons again. She threatened Mrs. Penelope with property seizure. She even called me out at the next HOA meeting, standing at the podium like a queen addressing her subjects. Mr. Sterling, she said sweetly, you've been quite the rebel lately. Perhaps this isn't the right community for someone like you. I smiled. I agree, Cordelia. Communities should be run by people who follow the law. A few neighbors chuckled under their breath. Cordelia's smile faltered. She glared at me. Watch yourself, Judge. I can make life very difficult here. I leaned back in my chair and said softly, You already have. Now it's my turn. Later that evening, I got a call from Raymond. His voice was shaky. She knows, Judge. She knows I gave you the documents. Are you all right? She sent people to my house. Said she'd ruin me if I talked again. I clenched my jaw. You did the right thing. Stay quiet for now. I'll handle the rest. After the call, I looked out the window. Cordelia's porch light was on. Her silhouette moved inside, pacing, restless. She was nervous, good. The kind of nervous that comes when a tyrant starts realizing her power isn't real anymore. That night, I told Ellen everything. She listened quietly, then said, So what's the plan? I smiled faintly. The plan, I said, is patience. Every tyrant eventually hangs themselves with their own rope. I just have to make sure the knot holds. The next morning, Cordelia made her boldest move yet. A notice taped to my front door. Final warning. Continued non-compliance will result in legal action. Legal action from a corporation that didn't even legally exist. I tore the notice off and folded it neatly. All right, Madam President, I whispered. Let's make this official. I opened my old briefcase, the one I hadn't touched since retirement, and pulled out a single form. Notice of intent to investigate fraudulent incorporation. The signature line was blank. It wouldn't be for long. That weekend, I invited the neighbors to my house for coffee. No agendas, no speeches, just conversation. At first, they were hesitant, scared, tired. Then Mrs. Penelope spoke. She can't keep doing this to us. Mark Henderson nodded. We're all afraid, Judge. She finds us for everything. I said calmly, then it's time to stop being afraid. I showed them the expired incorporation papers, the false filings, the bank statements Raymond had given me. Gasps filled the room. Mrs. Penelope whispered, You mean she's not even legal? Not for almost 2 years, I said. She's been stealing from all of you. Every dollar she took, every lien she filed. It's fraud. The room fell silent. Then Mark Henderson said, What do we do now? I smiled. Now, we watch her dig her own grave. And when she's done, we'll bury the whole thing in court. Cordelia thought she was untouchable. But the thing about tyrants is they always go too far. And when they do, the law doesn't need to chase them. It just waits. People always assume that justice happens in courtrooms, with gavels, juries, and polished speeches. They're wrong. Real justice begins in silence, behind closed doors, late at night, when no one's watching. That's where mine began. After that meeting with the neighbors, I knew I had enough to start. But this wasn't a case I could take to any courtroom yet. I needed evidence. Solid, undeniable evidence that Cordelia Ashworth wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was a criminal. And the best way to catch a criminal? Let them keep doing what they think they're getting away with. I started with what I had, the documents Raymond gave me. The HOA's business registration had expired 18 months earlier. That alone meant the organization had no legal standing. But the more I read, the stranger it got. There were transactions to companies no one had ever heard of: Community Compliance Solutions, Ashworth Consulting, Greenfield Property Maintenance. They all shared the same mailing address, Cordelia's home address. She was using the HOA's money to pay herself. I closed the folder slowly. You've been running a ghost organization, I whispered. And now, you're about to haunt yourself. The next morning, I visited Officer Martinez. He looked tired, the kind of tired cops get when they've been stuck enforcing rules instead of justice. When I showed him the documents, he let out a low whistle. She's running the HOA as a shell company. I nodded. And every check written to those businesses is traceable. I just need access to the HOA's bank records. Martinez frowned. That's going to take a warrant, Judge. I smiled. Then we'll give them a reason to issue one. He leaned back. You're serious about this? Serious enough to make sure she never does it again, I said. For the next few weeks, I documented everything. Cordelia had no idea that every one of her inspections was being filmed from multiple angles. Timestamps, dates, audio. She fined the Hendersons again for unsightly bicycles. She threatened to evict Mrs. Penelope for repeated noncompliance. Each time I recorded it. I installed small cameras at key locations, the HOA office door, her usual route around the neighborhood, even near her porch light where she often made calls. Every night, I reviewed footage like a detective piecing together a case file. And every night, the evidence grew heavier. It was almost poetic. The same woman who once mocked me for watering my flowers 2 minutes late was now being recorded watering down her lies. One evening, I was in my study, surrounded by papers and screens. Ellen came in quietly. Bart, it's almost midnight. I looked up from the monitor. Just one more clip. She smiled sadly. You said that 3 clips ago. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. Do you remember why I retired? She nodded. You said you were tired of fighting. I looked at the footage on the screen. Cordelia slipping envelopes into her mailbox after midnight. Well, I said softly, I think I found one more fight worth taking. The next day, I followed the money trail. Raymond, bless his quiet soul, helped me understand the HOA's accounts. Look here, he said, pointing at a spreadsheet. Every month, Cordelia writes 3 checks, all to different companies, all under $5,000. Under $5,000, I said. So she avoids the IRS reporting threshold. Raymond nodded. And the checks are cashed by the same person, her. We kept digging. That's when we found the property liens. Cordelia had filed fraudulent liens on several neighbors' homes, including the Hendersons and Mrs. Penelope. She claimed they owed unpaid HOA fees. In reality, she'd created fake overdue accounts in their names, then collected the debts through her shell companies. I leaned back and exhaled. She's been stealing from every single homeowner in this community. Raymond looked nervous. Judge, what if she finds out we're looking? I smiled faintly. Then she'll make another mistake, and I'll be waiting for it. That mistake came sooner than I expected. A week later, someone smashed the camera on my front lawn. The footage from the backup feed showed a woman in a hoodie, late at night, swinging a bat. She wasn't hard to recognize. Cordelia's posture was unmistakable, the sharp, rigid stance of someone who'd never worked an honest day in her life. I took the clip straight to Martinez. He watched silently, then said, That's destruction of property and tampering with evidence. I nodded. Exactly the kind of behavior that gets a judge's attention. He grinned. Funny, you still talk like one. Old habits die hard, I said. Cordelia must have realized I was closing in, because 2 days later, she did something desperate. She forged a restraining order. It was laughable, really. The document had the signature of a retired judge, one who'd been dead for 3 years. She taped it to my door with a note. You are legally prohibited from contacting or confronting HOA members. Violation will result in legal action. Ellen read it, looked at me, and burst out laughing. She really thinks this will scare you? I smiled. No, but it will hang her. The next morning, I met Martinez at the station. He had a small stack of papers. You're not going to believe this, he said. He handed me a file, Cordelia's background check. Turns out, she wasn't just an HOA president. She had 2 prior fraud charges in another state, both settled quietly, both under different names. She reinvented herself, I said. Moved here, built her empire from scratch. Until you moved in, Martinez said with a grin. Until I moved in, I echoed. It was time. I compiled everything. The expired incorporation documents, video proof of false reports, the destroyed camera, the forged order, the bank transfers. All of it neatly filed and labeled. When I was done, I looked at the folder sitting on my desk, thick, heavy, undeniable. I placed my old gavel on top of it and said softly, "Case closed." But I wasn't done. Justice isn't about collecting proof. It's about making the truth undeniable. The next HOA meeting was my stage. I didn't announce anything beforehand. I just walked in, took a seat, and waited. Cordelia stood at the front, smiling that same poisonous smile. "Before we begin," she said, "I'd like to remind everyone about the importance of order and decorum." I smiled. "You'll get plenty of both." The meeting went as usual. Cordelia lecturing, neighbors nodding, fear hanging heavy in the air. Then, when she tried to find the Hendersons again, I stood up. "Madam President," I said calmly, "before you continue, I'd like to raise a point of order." She frowned. "This isn't a courtroom, Judge." "No," I said, "but the law still applies." I opened my briefcase and placed a folder on the table. "This," I said, "is proof that Willowbrook Estates HOA ceased to exist 18 months ago." The room went silent. Cordelia's face froze. "That's absurd." "Not as absurd," I said, "as running a fake corporation, filing fraudulent liens, and paying yourself with other people's money." Gasps filled the room. I continued, my voice calm but sharp. "I have copies of every transfer, every check, every fake report you filed. You've stolen over $147,000 from the residents here." Cordelia's voice cracked. "You can't prove that." Officer Martinez stepped forward from the back of the room. "Actually," he said, "we can." For the first time, Cordelia looked afraid. And fear on a tyrant's face is a beautiful thing. The investigation was officially out of my hands now. Martinez contacted the district attorney. The FBI got involved. Within days, subpoenas were issued. Accounts frozen. Warrants signed. Cordelia tried to fight, to spin it as a misunderstanding. But fraud doesn't have misunderstandings. It has evidence. And I had plenty of it. A week later, I got a call from Martinez. "They're moving in on her tonight," he said. I nodded silently. "It's over." He paused. "You coming to the meeting tomorrow?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. That night, I sat in my backyard, the same place where all this began. The sprinklers turned on at exactly 7 o'clock. I watched them dance in the light, water glistening like small fragments of truth. Ellen came out with 2 cups of tea. "It's finally ending," she said softly. I nodded. "No, Ellen, it's just beginning." Because tomorrow, she finds out what happens when the law catches up with lies. The final HOA meeting was scheduled for Friday evening. Cordelia called it herself. She had no idea it would be her last one. The invitation said, "Mandatory attendance for all residents." Topic: Community discipline and leadership renewal. The irony was perfect. By 6 p.m., the community center was full. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, whispering anxiously. Everyone felt it. Something was about to happen. I sat in the second row, quiet, hands folded, the same briefcase resting at my feet. At the front of the room, Cordelia stood tall behind her podium, papers neatly stacked, her pearls shining under the fluorescent light. She looked confident, maybe even proud. Power does that to people right before they fall. It blinds them to the edge they're standing on. She started speaking in that usual, polished tone. "Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for your continued compliance with HOA policies. Our community remains one of the finest in the county." A few people nodded half-heartedly. She smiled wider. "And, as you may have heard, certain residents have recently spread false information regarding the HOA's operations. I'm here to set the record straight." I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, her last desperate attempt to regain control. She lifted a folder. "These rumors are unfounded. This association is fully compliant with all state requirements. Any accusations to the contrary will result in legal consequences." I stood up slowly. "Madam President," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "would you allow a member to respond?" Her eyes narrowed. "Mr. Sterling, this isn't a courtroom." "No," I said, "but the truth doesn't need one." The room went silent. Cordelia shifted uncomfortably. "You've already caused enough trouble." I stepped forward. "The only trouble I've caused, Cordelia, is telling the truth you've been hiding." I reached down, lifted my briefcase, and opened it on the table in front of everyone. Inside were neatly organized folders, photos, and documents. "This," I said, "is every lie you've told this community. Every fine, every false report, every dollar you've stolen." Gasps filled the room. Cordelia laughed nervously. "This is slander." "No," I said, "this is evidence." I held up a document. "This is the state record showing that the Willowbrook Estates, HOAs Incorporation, expired 18 months ago. You've been running a defunct organization. Every fine you issued, every payment you collected, all of it was illegal." The crowd murmured. Cordelia tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "That's ridiculous." I lifted another paper. "Here's proof that you funneled resident payments into your own companies: Community Compliance Solutions, Ashworth Consulting, and Greenfield Property Maintenance, all registered under your name. You paid yourself with our money." A man in the back shouted, "I knew it." Another neighbor stood up, furious. "You took over $1,000 from me last year." Cordelia slammed her hand on the podium. "Quiet. This is all fabricated." I stepped closer. "Is this fabricated too?" I asked, holding up a photograph, a still image from my camera footage showing her smashing my property with a bat. The timestamp glowed in the corner. The room erupted. Cordelia's face turned pale. "You can't use that against me. That's private property." I nodded. "It is. My private property." Officer Martinez stepped out from the back of the room. He'd been standing quietly until that moment. "Good evening, Ms. Ashworth," he said. "Officer Martinez, County Sheriff's Department." Cordelia froze. "You can't just barge in here." He held up a paper. "Actually, I can. This is a federal warrant for your arrest." Her eyes widened. "For what?" "Fraud, forgery, destruction of property, and filing false police reports." The color drained from her face. I watched her lips tremble as she tried to form words. "This is a mistake. You set me up." I said softly, "No, Cordelia. You set yourself up." Two agents entered the room, one from the FBI, one from the IRS. The sound of their boots on the floor was the loudest thing in the room. They moved toward her calmly, professionally. Cordelia backed away, voice shaking. "I was helping this community." One of the agents replied, "By stealing from it?" The crowd began to whisper, then cheer softly as she was handcuffed. Mrs. Penelope covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mark Henderson stood up and clapped. For the first time in months, I saw something in my neighbors' faces that had been missing: relief. Cordelia glared at me as they led her past. "You think you've won?" she hissed. I met her gaze. "No, justice did." As the agents escorted her out, silence filled the hall. I turned to the neighbors. For 2 years, she ruled through fear. But fear only works when we let it. From this day forward, we run this neighborhood together. The crowd broke into applause. It wasn't loud or wild. It was the sound of people reclaiming something they'd forgotten they owned: peace. Later that night, Martinez came by my house. He handed me a copy of the arrest report. "She's facing 18 months minimum," he said. "The DA's office is pressing charges for every fraudulent lien." I nodded slowly. "Good. The residents deserve their money back." He smiled. "They'll get it. The IRS is already freezing her accounts." Ellen stepped out onto the porch, listening quietly. Martinez tipped his hat. "Judge, you could have just moved out like everyone else. Why didn't you?" I looked at him. "Because some fights are worth staying for." He nodded. "Well, you won this one." I smiled faintly. "No, Martinez. The law did." The next morning, I took a slow walk through the neighborhood. For the first time in months, people smiled again. Kids played chalk games on the driveway. Mrs. Penelope was feeding her birds without fear. And the Hendersons were hanging string lights on their porch. As I passed by, Mark called out, "Judge, no more fines for late sprinklers, right?" I laughed. "Not unless you water past midnight." Everyone laughed. Ellen walked beside me, her hand in mine. "You look happy," she said. "I am," I said softly, "because justice doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to remember what it's supposed to stand for." That night, as the sun set, I sat in my garden, the same place where it all began. The sprinklers turned on at exactly 7 o'clock. The water sparkled in the fading light. And for the first time, I didn't hear sirens. Just peace. I whispered to myself. Case closed. Justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like dawn after a long, dark night. Cordelia Ashworth was convicted on 4 counts: fraud, forgery, filing false reports, and destruction of property. The trial was short. The evidence, undeniable. I wasn't there to gloat. I'd spent enough of my life inside courtrooms watching people fall. This time, I just want to see people rise. The DA later told me the total she'd stolen from the residents was $147,000. The court ordered full restitution and sentenced her to 18 months in federal prison. For someone who once believed she could control everyone, it must have been a strange feeling, being told exactly when to wake up, when to eat, when to sleep. Irony, I suppose, has a poetic sense of timing. A month after her sentencing, we held our first community meeting without her. No podiums, no speeches, just neighbors sitting in a circle, coffee cups in hand, talking like human beings again. Mark Henderson stood up first. I think we all owe Judge Sterling a thank you. I smiled. No, you don't owe me anything. You all just needed to remember that this neighborhood belongs to you, not to a piece of paper or a person with a title. Mrs. Penelope raised her hand shyly. Can I put my bird feeders back up? Everyone laughed. I nodded. You don't even have to ask for the first time in months. The room felt light. You could almost feel the fear lifting off people's shoulders, replaced with something rare and fragile. Hope. Over the next few weeks, things changed. The Henderson kids turned their driveway into a rainbow of chalk art. Mrs. Penelope's front yard bloomed again. Ellen hosted her first garden party. No permits, no approvals, no stress. A few of the residents approached me about forming a new HOA, one that was transparent, community-led, and voluntary. I agreed to help them draft the charter, but with one condition. No one person gets to hold power for more than a year. Ever. They all nodded. It wasn't just a rule. It was a reminder. One afternoon, Officer Martinez stopped by. He leaned against the fence, sipping coffee. Hard to believe this place was a war zone a few months ago. I chuckled. Turns out, peace was here all along. It just needed its rights back. He smiled. Cordelia's appeal was denied, by the way. Good, I said. She'll have plenty of time to think. He raised an eyebrow. You ever regret it? Getting involved? I looked out over the yard. The trimmed roses, the soft hum of the sprinklers, Ellen reading on the porch. Not once, I said. Justice is like a muscle. If you stop using it, it weakens. I just gave it a little exercise. That evening, I walked down to the lake at the edge of the neighborhood. The sun was low, painting the sky gold. I could hear laughter from houses nearby, something I hadn't heard in a long time. Peace is a sound. It's gentle, like forgiveness. I picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. The ripples spread outward, soft circles, growing wider. That's what truth does. It doesn't shout. It ripples. Ellen walked up beside me, her hands slipping into mine. You did the right thing, she said softly. I nodded. Maybe, but it wasn't about being right. It was about making things right. She smiled. You always did have a way with words, Judge. Not anymore, I said. Now, it just let actions speak. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the county court. An official notice confirming that all residents of Willowbrook Estates had been reimbursed in full. Attached was a handwritten note from the DA. Sometimes, justice doesn't wear a robe. It just wears persistence. I placed it on my desk, right next to my old gavel. I haven't touched that gavel in years, but that night, I gave it one final tap. Not for a verdict, for closure. It's funny, really. People like Cordelia believe power comes from control. They think leadership means making others small. But I've learned something after a lifetime in law. Power isn't control. It's responsibility. And those who forget that eventually answer to someone who remembers. Now, every morning at 7 o'clock, my sprinklers come on. Sometimes I just stand there watching the waterfall. Same routine, same peace. Only now, when I hear the faint hum of the water, it doesn't sound like a warning. It sounds like freedom. I often think back to the day Cordelia called the police on me. That single, ridiculous act of arrogance. In a way, I should thank her. because she reminded me that the fight for fairness doesn't end when you retire. It ends when you stop caring. And I'm not done caring. So, if you're listening to this, whether you live in a quiet suburb or a crowded city, remember this. Rules matter, but people matter more. And when someone uses rules to hurt others, they stop serving the community and start serving themselves. That's when people like you, like me, need to stand up calmly, firmly, with proof and patience, and remind them what justice looks like. Because justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belonged to the brave. They called it trespassing. I called it the day truth walked through my garden.